Stanley Kubrick is often remembered for being numerous things: a director, an artist, a visionary, a photographer, a madman. But what I find remarkable about Kubrick is what is often overlooked within his short but near perfect filmography. This being his screenplays. You see, what's fascinating about Kubrick's screenplays is the fact that all but a few shorts and documentaries in his early years were based upon novels. He never wrote a single screenplay that was entirely his own invention, always based upon both history and a wide range of novelists. Kubrick always had a deep fascination with literature, and the entire prospect of telling stories in general, whilst many analyse his films to death and insist on finding meaning in every nook and cranny within his films. Kubrick made his films for the audience, for the initial viewing experience. He wanted his audience to not analyse his films, but to so much experience his films, to interact with his films and feel through his visual medium. And so he would base his films off novels, as through reading these novels he had the opportunity to experience the story for the first time, much like the audience would for his films. He would be able to determine exactly what worked about the story and what he disliked. He never so much adapted the novels, but used them more as inspiration, a springboard for his own imagination, crafting the storyline into something that was entirely his own. However, no matter the story he would be adapting, Kubrick would find a way to craft a film with his own personal touch. Kubrick dabbled within a vast range of genres and thematic contexts, from dark comedies about the intimacies of forbidden love to political satires of the Cold War, from a dystopian expression of brutal violence and utterly taboo sexual acts to a deeply profound look at what it means to be human and the exploration of time and space. He meddled within horror and erotic thrillers, period pieces, and Vietnam-based studies of the human condition under warfare. Kubrick was not pigeonholed within one specific genre, and yet all these films are so undoubtedly the workings of Kubrick, even though many may juxtapose one another thematically, on the surface level anyway. Whilst many may explain this away by noting his visual style, I feel the explanation goes a little deeper than that. For all these films, no matter what, have one thing in common: the unconventional look at character and the way Kubrick viewed the people within his films. Throughout his career, Kubrick would frequently go against the basic fundamentals of the protagonist, antagonist, and the concept of character arcs. Before we discuss how he does this, however, perhaps we should narrow down the basics of what these fundamentals are. The protagonist is the person the audience follows. They have a goal in mind, something they want, something they need, and after an initial inciting incident, they fight all external forces within the story to achieve their goals. This will usually set the protagonist upon a journey from point A to point B, and during this time the protagonist will often have some form of revelation or change in character. This is known as the character arc. And where there is the protagonist, there is the antagonist, someone or something who either directly or indirectly stops the protagonist from achieving their goals. This creates conflict in the storyline, therefore creating drama, and drama crafts the very fundamentals of storytelling. Without drama, there is no story, and most films, no matter the storyline, follow this basic guide. An example of this would be A New Hope. Luke is our protagonist, and after an inciting incident, he wants to save the galaxy, a clear goal in mind. Darth Vader, or the Empire as a whole, is our antagonist. They wish to destroy the galaxy, therefore creating conflict within the storyline as they go against Luke's goals and stop him from achieving these goals. And whilst this is an obvious example, it reigns true even in films where it may not be so obvious. In Castaway, Tom Hanks' Chuck Noland is stranded on an island after the inciting incident of a plane crash. He, as the protagonist, now has the goal of leaving the island and returning home. Simple. But who is the antagonist? Surely there is no bad guy or villain. No, there isn't. But there is an undoubtedly obvious antagonist, this being the island itself, as it is an external force that stops Tom Hanks from achieving his goals. Wilson! Wilson! Now, this concept works just fine for the majority of screenwriters. It makes the plot clear, removes any confusion, and swiftly creates drama and an enticing storyline. But Kubrick wanted to dig a little deeper with his characters, and more often than not either meddled with the very basic fundamentals of the protagonist and antagonist, and in some cases throws out the concept completely. In The Shining, for example, we are introduced to Jack Torrance, our protagonist, who has moved his family into the haunted Overlook Hotel for the winter and is being influenced by ghosts. Now, most screenwriters would craft a conflict by making these aforementioned ghosts the antagonists, and the drama in the film would be Jack trying to get himself and his family out from the hotel to overcome the evil that surrounds them. But interestingly, Jack turns throughout the film. What starts as the protagonist actually morphs into the antagonist of the film, ending with Jack's family becoming the protagonist, wishing to escape, and Jack being the antagonist that stops them from doing so. In A Clockwork Orange, Kubrick meddles with his idea once more, but instead employing a subversion of the idea of the character arc. Where in most screenplays the protagonist would go on to significant change and alteration in their personality after fighting against the forces of the antagonist, A Clockwork Orange instead does the opposite, where after an entire film of attempting to alter the nature of the perverse and violent Alex, he ends up right back where he started, undergoing no significant change in his character at all.
I was cured, all right.
He doesn't go from point A to point B. He starts at point A, appears as though he is making his way over to the point B, only to turn right back around and end up back at point A. A full circle. Many would argue that this makes the entirety of the film meaningless in design, but Kubrick says this is the point. Through his use of non-existent character arcs, he manages to non-verbally express the primary themes of the film itself. How corporate and governmental meddling with the troubled individual cannot cure them from their psychopathic nature, for to do so would make them a machine, not a human being.
You were in the papers again, son. It said they had done great wrong to you. It said how the government drove you to try and do yourself in.
And in Kubrick's masterpiece 2001: A Space Odyssey, Kubrick takes the very idea of the protagonist to the extreme. I'm sure many of you are probably unable to say who the clear protagonist of the film is, and whilst many would argue that the stoically courageous astronaut Dave is our primary antagonist, he doesn't even show up until almost the halfway point of the film. In actuality, the protagonist of the film is no individual, but the entirety of humanity. Following Todrov's basic classical narrative structure and applying it to what we have already established for the basic fundamentals of the protagonist, we can see this to be clear. We start with the equilibrium, the unevolved mankind apes with no real purpose or motive. Then we get our disruption, or our inciting incident, the introduction of the monolith, causing mankind to suddenly grow intelligent and self-aware, to question the universe and to evolve into greater beings. Now, the protagonists wish to have meaning, to have purpose, and when the monolith lands once more centuries later, the moment of recognition takes place. The protagonists have a goal, to find out what the monolith is, and to get answers from the universe. They must overcome obstacles, such as the murderous and self-destructive Hal, the primary antagonist of the film, and so, the protagonists must face conflict against this antagonist to reach their goal. Finally, there is the moment of repair. Dave enters into the Stargate and is finally greeted with the monolith once more. He gets his answers, and equilibrium is restored. Humanity evolves once more, now with the new knowledge of the universe. And whilst this may not be obvious, mainly for the fact that the audience is never told what this newfound knowledge is, the basics of the narrative structure is clear. It is an incredibly profound and extraordinary approach to the character arc, but that's exactly what Kubrick had in mind. When we look at Kubrick's films through this new lens of character and narrative structures, we can clearly see what made him a master. For with every film he'd approach differently, tackling a new genre, new themes, new ideas, but the way he wrote his screenplay stayed the same. always studying the nature of character, and never allowing his characters to delve into the obvious or the normal. Stanley Kubrick approached his films as an exercise in telling stories, and at the heart of every story is character, are his characters, in all their abnormal, psychopathic, uncomfortable, and unrelentingly truthful forms. So yes, Kubrick was a director, an artist, a visionary, a photographer, and quite possibly a madman. But above all, he was a storyteller.